Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really incredible conversation with Mark Greenaway. Now, Mark, you are a multi-time, I think two-time B2B CRO. You kind of relish coming into very complex environments and selling strategies. And a lot of what you do is bring focus to this complexity and align teams. And that's going to be a huge part of what we talk about today, because it's part of what is the title of our podcast here: when opportunity becomes the enemy of scaling. And not being aligned internally. Actually, to tell you the truth, I talk to C-suite executives and I always ask them what are your top two challenges for long-term sustainable growth? Alignment is the number one. Just bringing the teams together. You'd think that's such a basic thing, right? But we're gonna expand on that quite a bit here today. You also have an interesting background. If you had your preference, you wouldn't have been a CRO. You would have been a professional sailor. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Yeah, hi, Stephen, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to join you, and you've had an absolutely great set of guests, and I've had a chance to look at a few of your prior podcasts. Yeah, I'm 25 years in the tech industry and in go-to-market almost entirely, but my first career was actually as a sailor, and I wanted to be a pro sailor, and that went as far as I could take it. And my second career is the tech industry, and I've really, really enjoyed it. It's not actually my kids that do the sailing, and I'm taking one of them to Spain tomorrow to compete in international regatta. That's what I do outside of my work.
I know having kids, I've got four, is a practice in focus and alignment in a very different way. But in the business world, you kind of had focus rise to the top in terms of the single biggest driver of long-term growth. And I just wanted to get your point of view on why and what that means to you.
Yeah, I think the number one challenge I see in B2B go-to-market, and particularly enterprise B2B go-to-market, is focus. I say that because it's the thing that I usually need to fix every time I step into a team or an opportunity or an organization in some way with a growth opportunity. Opportunity there, great offering, maybe good engagement, just not quite fulfilling the potential yet fully for whatever reason. And what I invariably see is a great proposition that is maybe just being spread too thin. And because there is opportunity and interest in that offering, the organization, the go-to-market team, will be spreading themselves too broadly across that opportunity rather than focusing in where they can be most successful. Their customers can be most successful as well.
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned that I asked that question, right, about the top challenges. The top three challenges are always internal challenges. And it blew me away at the beginning. I mean, I thought, when we talk about our greatest challenges for creating long-term sustainable growth, we like to point outside of ourselves and our organization at the market and the trends and our competition and all kinds of stuff, right? But everything was internal. And I can't think of a more basic thing than focus and alignment. But I got to tell you, I did a whole series on, how and why B2B CMOs and CROs don't always get along and aren't always in alignment. And I'd love to get your thought on why alignment. Therefore, I'm kind of using focus and alignment interchangeably here, but why it's such a big problem.
And, I've been really lucky to work with some absolutely great marketing leaders, both in European region and worldwide, and some of them. What's really important is who you take the proposition to: the organization, the segment, the vertical, and the persona and personas within that organization. That's really fundamental. Cost of acquiring a customer is really driven by qualification and focus. The win rate is about focus before it's about sales performance or marketing performance. And yeah, it's still a challenge to align marketing and sales together. But if either is off the mark in terms of focus, then there's going to be an issue in terms of performance. I've worked in organizations where the marketing performance was just exceptional, but the conversion rate was really low, and vice versa in organizations where marketing was contributing less, but the sales generated pipeline, the sales generated performance, or the pipeline generated from the customer success team was much higher and the conversion rate was much higher. So getting both focused on the same thing is the first step to really close alignment. You can generate a lot of opportunities and inquiries on the marketing side and not be able to fulfill on the sales side. And there's no point just being more focused on either marketing or the sales side without aligning that focus together. And again, it's often about deciding which are the best verticals and sub verticals, what are the best segments as well within that, and really being very disciplined about that.
It's interesting. The third challenge that all these C-suite executives we've interviewed, over 250, say is the balance between long-term and short-term. And this focus and alignment, and I just love to get your opinion on this, because in the best world, the sales department would love to have the highest qualified SQLs ever come their way. They are in the buying mode. They've established budgets. They've got a timeline. They're willing to talk to us. It's like they're ready to go. They're ready to make a decision. That would be perfect. Lots of times what we get is earlier stage leads, MQLs, SQLs, however you define it, that are earlier in that stage. And I would love to get your thought on this, because what's happened dramatically today is that if we come into the game later than earlier, we're being left out. And that's not me saying that Bain and Company and Accenture and Forrester and right, you name it. I think Sixth Sense had a big benchmark study that day one, we decide as buyers who our top 4 or 5 choices are. And 95% of the time, we close a deal with one of those. Here's my question, is that to me says we need to be surfacing, especially in an ABM motion, earlier conversations. Because if we're not part of the early conversations, we're left out. We're in the cold. But early conversations coming into the sales team can be a lot of times looked upon as, that's going to be wasting my time. I got a quota. I got bonuses that I want to hit. That dilemma of early stage, late stage, that goes even farther than like defining the ICP or the persona, but defining the kind of lead that as an organization we want in our pipeline. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think we're seeing less and less linearity in that marketing to sales funnel. And we know what's going on. We're very well aware of it, as you said. And Robert Sanchez referred to this in one of your earlier podcasts. The buying cycle is ever more disrupted. The vendors are being involved later. The prospects, the customers are doing more research themselves early on. And therefore, the provider, the vendor, is much later in the cycle in feeling they're able to influence it. And many things will have been decided by that point. So that's a major part of it. I take a view on this that the most important thing is to approach with insight. And if you have the right focus on the right ICP, that's really meaningful. It's not just a set of slides, but it's a really closely defined ICP that aligns to the value that you can deliver, your credibility, experience, and so on. Then you can approach the customer with so much more insight and show so much more empathy early on and build so much more trust. And that's another thing which one of your earlier, I think probably Robert as well, referred to in the discussions. And building that earlier empathy and trust, or as early as possible, is going to lead to a much better conversation. I look for opportunities to turn the cycles, the buying cycles around by being much more proactive in building pipeline and approaching as an organization, an aligned organization, sales and marketing, and at a later stage, customer success together, because the traditional funnel, the traditional marketing to sales pipeline is unlikely to return, I think, as we see it.
Just yesterday, I had on the podcast, hasn't come out yet. We just recorded it yesterday, a chief sales officer, and she oversees a global team that operates in 66 different countries, 40 different people on her sales team. And about a year ago, based on a lot of what you're talking about right now, they completely changed their compensation structure. They got away with quotas. They're all salaried individuals. There's KPIs that they have that they can bonus on, but they took away the out of balance of the short term, long term, because they felt they were missing opportunities. They felt like they kept coming in too late, that the sales team got engaged too late in the process, but that they didn't want to engage earlier. And that leads that were coming in from marketing that were earlier stage they weren't even being like entered into Salesforce, right? They literally redid the entire sales department. And there's a whole episode on it that's coming out that she sings the praises, and revenue's up, employee satisfaction's up in the sales team. You're right. They're collaborative now. It's co-opetition, not competition amongst the sales team. And like, how do we think about this? Like, obviously, what you just said is so profound, right? We're not going back to the old buyer's journey. It's not. We're embracing it's like survival of the fittest, right? It's like Darwinism, right? We're going to either adapt or we're going to die, right? So in your mind, what do we need to do to adapt to this, right? It's a very different environment.
It's really visionary what you're talking about, and it will be the exception, I believe, for the time being. But it's a great thought, and I'll talk about AI a little bit more later, I'm sure. But we're going to be using AI more and more, but not to engage. We'll be using it more and more for the next few years in support. I firmly believe what you're talking about is obviously a necessary approach to take. Now, I think if you can get your focus right, your approach right, the proposition, the expression of value, you approach the customer, the prospective customer, with the insight on their organization, their challenges, and the vision of how you can help them. There isn't going to be the challenge that's going to lead to needing to turn your entire sales organization, sales approach upside down. That's fundamental. I think we will see more and more visionary ideas like that. What I'm seeing, and over the past couple of years, is I think it's a return, but it's an adoption of full cycle selling as the predominant approach in the market in B2B, and especially enterprise B2B, upper mid-market enterprise B2B. And that all that means is that the sales execs are selling the new customer, but also helping those customers grow and get the most from, whatever the platform might be. And there are a few reasons for that, but it's driving, in theory, it's a better experience for the buyer, which is pretty fundamental. It's a shorter cycle for the overall organization, and it's going to produce the best outcome at the end of the day as well. So full cycle selling is a clear trend. I mean, you've got about half of B2B organizations who have already adopted it, and a significant chunk, if not half of the rest, are adopting it.
And just to be clear, so when you talk about full cycle, and usually there's a baton pass from sales to customer success. Well, we close a deal and it's like, oh, great, boom, you take over. We're going to go back to selling some more deals, right? And what you're talking about is that full cycle is that, and the clients don't necessarily want that too. So I clearly get how on a full cycle, it's extending past the sale. Where does on a full cycle of the buying journey, how is that redefined?
So you're talking about a better buyer experience because there are fewer handoffs. You're achieving a reduced customer acquisition cost because there are fewer handoffs, because the whole process is more efficient and better for the customer, and builds and retains more trust along the way. And it's also higher speed for those reasons. The other thing that's been going on is that expansion motion, that expansion focus for many, many organizations has become all the more important because The new business approach, the new business funnel has been disrupted. We've had all sorts of things change over the past few years in technology, and we've seen it become, a little bit harder to sell to new customers. We've seen more competition and a lot of niche players in various spaces as well. Refocusing, and especially with the need to think about the customer acquisition costs, especially with interest rates, how they've been, it's really quite important to get the most from the team. And that's been about focusing on expansion.
You've got a really defined point of view on the role of the CRO and the ownership that the CRO has as an orchestrator across, an entire commercial ecosystem here. And you even talked about it as kind of beyond sales, right? Which a lot of CROs, you can have marketing, customer success, you can have the entire go-to-market motion underneath the CRO. What do you think is the role of the modern CRO today?
Look, I think it can vary. What I'm saying is that invariably find an organization that could focus itself in more on the right customer through all those other things I've talked about, and can be all the more successful. It's bad for everyone to sell the wrong thing to the wrong customer. It doesn't succeed. So really focusing in on that ICP, aligning all the functions together around that ICP, and ensuring that there's a healthy feedback loop from the customer and prospect base back to product. So look, we're talking quite a broad span here, and it's not necessarily about ownership. So I'm usually stepping in to solve for a bigger go-to-market opportunity than is currently being exploited. So I'll have looked at product and proposition and the organization and so on. I'll believe there's something which is viable and of high potential. So I'm thinking about go-to-market, the whole go-to-market, and thinking about whether that really prime opportunity has been fully understood and had enough focus. Now, to really exploit that does need marketing. It needs that very effective handoff from marketing to sales and feedback. And it needs close partnership with customer success, delivery as well. And in the background, often a conversation with product or some involvement with product. So the scope of the CRO is to orchestrate all of this. And the unsung heroes are the revenue operations team. That's my friends in RevOps who are doing the silent role of making the whole thing work and providing the support, the guidelines, and the guardrails as well, and the governance necessary to do this commercially. I don't think it is as important what the organizational scope is if you as CRO are thinking about what the responsibility is to build that machine and operate that revenue machine for an organization. This was referred to in one of your prior podcasts as well. And the marketing is a really crucial function. I don't think that marketing is necessarily a natural fit within a CRO remit. I personally really enjoy working alongside a marketing leader. When it comes to post-sale, I've talked a lot about the importance of expansion of customers, and the best partnership to do that can be between the full cycle sales exec and customer success or implementation team. I think a close alignment of those, and that can be a good natural scope for a CRO as well. When it comes to professional services, that can be quite a big stretch at the other end of the customer cycle for a CRO. So I think the most important thing is that a CRO is working across the full scope, but not necessarily ultimately responsible for the full set of functions. And I personally really value the marketing function and partnership.
I want to go back to a number of things that you said there. Is you talked about saying no to deals. And, we had talked earlier in a conversation about saying no to protect growth. And what did you mean by that? And what's the power of the word no mean to a CRO?
The issue is that by the time you're at a point where you have a viable opportunity and you're in serious discussions, there might still be a competitor in play, and you've invested significant time. We're talking months at that point. And if that was not the right segment, or that was like an outlier in terms of a vertical, or Worst of all, it's in a market that you have not served previously or do not have the sort of presence or ability to execute within. That's going to be very costly. So it's not at the point that you have an opportunity that you're advanced with, halfway through the sales cycle, that you want to say no. It's much, much earlier. And gearing the whole go-to-market operation from marketing right through sales to delivery, but particularly from the marketing side, to be focusing on that ICP, a closely defined ICP, and in pretty close partnership with sales all the way through as well. So it's not a handoff and over the fence, but it's in close alignment. We know how many touch points it takes to reach a key persona within an organization. It's only gone up in the past 10 years. It's gone from 5 touch points to get an engagement to many, many more. We know that the buyer group, the number of personas that you need to engage on a complex solution is now over 10. It just becomes more and more expensive to be off the mark in terms of focus as a revenue organization.
It's interesting. I never thought about it that way. The amount of touch points that we have, the amount of effort has dialed up. And so the cost to the organization to spend that time on a customer that isn't the right fit. And then you went on to say earlier, and I'd love to get your point on this, like serving a wrong customer is costly. How is that costly to the organization in your mind?
We're all looking for optimization of customer acquisition cost. We're hopefully in an organization that has a reasonably good gross margin and has a good customer lifetime. We want to acquire customers and retain customers for as long as possible. And if we're not in the right space, we're not going to retain customers. We've burnt all the customer acquisition cost for nothing, maybe actually reduced the profitability of the organization. That's not a great place. It might be because the teams not just lacked focus, but they've lacked enablement or they've lacked guidance and they've chased something which has been on both sides a genuine mistake. And you end up with often not picking just any one function, but a really unhappy customer CIO. Now, some of the best opportunities and relationships can come from solving problems in that sort of engagement, but it's just not the place to start. It's not the place to plan for. I really value the relationships I've built over the years with CIOs and CMOs that I've worked with closely. I really expect them to call me directly anytime of day or night and tell me if there's something that I can do to help. I value that trust, but you don't want to plan for that. That's what you do when things maybe don't work out, but you have to start knowing that you can deliver the value to that organization and ensure that executive is successful in what they're trying to do as well, because you're asking for quite a lot of trust from a senior executive and committing an investment in the enterprise space. You need to be pretty sure you can deliver to them.
Yeah, it's, they put a lot of trust in us. They've put a lot of risk. They had a lot of skin in the game when they hire us. We tend to think about it as, well, if it doesn't turn out and they churn, we don't want that. We got to keep track of our NRR. We got to make sure churn is down. In fact, Forrester said that 73% of new annual revenue comes from existing clients. So we better bring the clients in that are the perfect fit for us, that we could keep and have them love us and expand that relationship. Our long-term growth is dependent on that. But in addition to that, you just made a really good point. If we're churning clients because we're not serving them, we're bringing them in because it's enticing to get that revenue in and hit those quotas and go to the board meetings and be like, yeah, look how great things are going. But if we're churning, we're also developing mistrust in the marketplace, right? We want clients that love us. Our brand is a trust mark. And, you mentioned Forrester earlier, they came out with their predictions for 2023 or 2026, and it was all about trust. It was all about trust. So, everything that we do at every stage of the buying journey, and you just talked about like a full circle, and that includes after the deal is closed, if that's not a good experience, that's a ding on our brand. That's a ding on the trust that somebody put into us, that buying committee and that company put into us. I hadn't thought about it that way. I really appreciate that perspective.
Huge amount of advocacy as well, an opportunity for advocacy. And that is one of the most powerful tools when it comes to business and enterprise sales. You said Forrester had indicated 73% of growth was from existing customers. Yeah, I think that's very much how things have been in tech over the past few years for the reasons we've talked about. The other aspect has been retention, and retention is a really big focus for many SaaS organizations at the moment. That has been quite a big challenge. And we've seen on a few occasions, particularly quite big focus from customer organizations, from enterprises on consolidation. It's been such a big focus in terms of consolidating platforms, cutting costs as well. That's why the SaaS industry has had to think so much about retention and getting foresight and getting insight, and then being able to prevent that and retain customers. So it's not just about, are you fully exploiting customer growth opportunity? Organizations have been. It's been, do we understand our risks? Do we understand where customers aren't happy, need help, and are we managing our retention fully?
I wish we had another couple of hours to go on. This is fascinating, but we've already covered a lot of territory. And I wanted to give you an opportunity that if there was one thing as a CRO that you wanted to tell the rest of the community of your peers, of other C-suite executives at B2B companies, and we had a ton of SaaS, like probably 60% of the audience is SaaS. So, what one thing would you want them to leave with and take away from our conversation today?
We've talked about a range of things. We talked about the unit economics and how we impact that. We talked about full cycle selling and how that helps with the unit economics. The one thing I know every sales leader, go-to-market leader, CRO is thinking about right now is AI. I know everyone is, and I don't profess to be the expert in this any more than anyone else, but everyone's thinking about how to best exploit AI. Gartner would say it's 5 years before the AI vision is fully fulfilled in go-to-market. And it's not ready. The capabilities are not yet ready for full engagement right now, but there's a huge opportunity to eliminate inefficiencies in go-to-market and really maximize your team's time for customer engagements using AI to really support the human engagement, the person-to-person engagement within business-to-business relationships. I think that's the most important thing to focus on right now in AI. There are ways at the moment of supporting nurture, for example, or supporting some earlier stage engagement. Yes, certainly. But right now, the opportunity is to increase the productivity of your go-to-market team with it.
That is probably an entire series of podcasts to get into that, and I would love to do that. But I just want to say that the mission of this podcast here is to bring different perspectives, different insights, different experiences from around the world, from across the C-suite, so that we all can learn from each other and our peer community. If we do that, then that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. You certainly had some real good thoughts and zingers in there that were a big part of that rising tide today. I just wanted to say thank you for coming on today.
Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.